moment of silence.
That's correct.
Can we please stand and pledge allegiance to the flag? Dan, will you take us, please?
Sure.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Before us, we have a revised agenda and an additional revision would be under 11B to strike the report on Budget Committee because it has not met nor has it yet been established. Pardon? With that, I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved, Mr. President.
Thank you,
Second.
John. Thank you, Dan. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstention? Motion carried. Moving ahead to public comments, is there anyone here this evening who would like to provide any public comments to the board? Seeing none, communications or commendations, Dr. Taggarty, are there any?
Well, I just ask you to take a look around the boardroom, and this is the residual leftover of what happened with the STAR program this summer. An incredible experience. I had the honor and the pleasure of listening to the children singing and dancing and watching them rehearse and perform. And they had their final event Friday night. I was not able to attend, but I heard it was just outstanding. So I just thank Nick and company for everything that they did for our children throughout that time.
And segueing into number 7, superintendent's report.
Sure. I can update on where we are. I did a review with all of our administrators today in terms of the move management and building readiness. And we are, again, still ahead of schedule, really good shape. As Jerry said, 80% ready at the middle school. Pretty much, that was every building. We are still here at the high school looking at a couple of space changes maybe in where the lockers may go. Another idea came forward, so I'll be working with Mark Voorhees on that. We may actually create a mini locker bay type of thing on the 3rd floor for approximately 92 lockers on both sides there, so we don't have to use the basement. So we'll be looking at that and exploring that over the next couple of days. Staff are starting to come in, prepare their rooms, so that's a positive, and moving forward in that direction. I am looking for presentations that the board would like to see. We usually have presentations on various programs or different things that are going on in the district, so if there's anything in particular that you would like to have any type of presentation on, that would be nice to be brought forward so that I can prepare people. We are currently looking at both Nick and Barb and Jerry presenting in September on summer school, the results of summer school and what transpired there, so that would be one area, but I certainly would appreciate any input from board members in terms of what you would like to see for presentations. And in the agenda tonight, it speaks to a resolution about the selling of the schools. Just to reinforce, the looking at the minimum bid was a recommendation from the school attorney that we set a minimum bid so that there's a starting point and you could go from there. But again, just a reminder that any and all bids can be either accepted or rejected by the board as we move forward. So.
And it's up to the voters ultimately.
Totally up to the voters ultimately, because the board can accept, we take it to the voters as a public vote, and they could say no. So everything ultimately is up to the voters.
Any questions or comments from the board? Seeing none, then, or hearing none as well. On to the consent agenda. There are 2 items.
I'll move the consent agenda, Mr. President.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Paul.
George and Rita couldn't make it.
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carried. approve the use of the high school. Thank you, Paul. Second?
Seconded.
Thank you, Dan. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carried. Upon the recommendation of the superintendent to allow Washington West as an evacuation site for Eden Heights.
I'll make the motion.
Thank you, Dan.
Second.
Thank you, Paul. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstention? Motion carried. Thank you. On to C, with regard to the tax warrant, upon the recommendation of Dr. Caggerty to approve the 2012-13 tax warrant. Thank you, Paul.
Second.
Thank you, Amy. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? I believe we will have documents to sign to that regard, so that would.
I feel as though Boardmanville School Building has had significant interest and more interest from organizations that would contribute to the tax base, like Mr. Kenizer was saying in the Buildings and Grounds meeting. That would be a welcome thing for our community. But when you're dealing with a neighborhood like the one I've lived in most of my life, which is wonderful, but it is 70% poverty. I think given all that that school has provided us, we should take a little more consideration or a little longer to consider how it is we are going to turn that building over to the next occupant. And that's pretty much how I feel. I would feel more comfortable if I were voting on the sale of Boardmanville and maybe another option for Irish J. Norton. We have a shared decision-making committee that's meeting regularly, reviewing the CDEP. They could offer an advisory to the board. They're a example of a comprehensive representation of our community, and perhaps they would be able to offer something in this decision. But I feel as though this is a bit premature. I understand we can reject bids, but I'm not even 100% convinced, having not heard the benefits of other options, that this is the right thing to do today.
Other comments?
One good thing about IJ is it's protected by its place on the National Historic Register as an historic building. So much of what you see there has to remain that way. As for use, I share Amy's hope that it stays in the educational area. I really do. Whether or not that happens is something that the board has some control over. And I think our protection is that we have the right to reject any bids without cause, right, Colleen?
Correct.
Without cause. Amy is certainly right that there's a lot of interest in Boardmanville by both non-for-profits and privates.
And educational
And
institutions.
educational. So, speaking for myself, I have no problem coupling them because we have the ability to reject anything that comes in. If we did not have that ability, I would be concerned.
We also have 2 or more people at IGM than we have at Boardmanville as well.
Really?
Mhm. And most of the IGM interest is a not-for-profit type of organization.
Educational,
Well, not educational, but
but
not-for-profit.
not for profit. Okay.
Not-for-profit can be recovering drug addicts and paroled felons and all kinds of things fall under the non-for-profit umbrella. They are essential to society and to the betterment of society, but maybe not the best for a residential area, especially one with significant poverty.
I'm sure our president remembers, maybe Amy, you do too, unless you were too young then, when Estelle tried to move into the White House.
I remember.
And that was a horrible PR. That was a textbook case of how not to do something.
But that's not the total makeup of all nonprofits.
No.
Just one of the many possibilities.
Mr. President,
Yeah.
I don't see any harm, in postponing this until, the August 21st meeting, unless there's, significant deadlines that, are pretty pressing, but I agree that, perhaps, we ought to maybe do a little bit of a public sounding in terms of what the public's interest, would be. I mean, I've heard a lot, we've all heard a lot in terms of adaptive reuse or, interest or non-interest, but, maybe it would be a good idea to reach out to the public, and ask them, the specific question of how they would like to see that, facility, part of their community. So I guess I would move to postpone consideration on this particular amendment for.
What are we gonna accomplish in 2 weeks? What are we gonna find out in 2 weeks if we postpone it?
I still have several questions I haven't even asked yet. Like, what is
Doesn't that go through the?
Excuse me, Dan, are you done? And Mike and allow Paul and we'll take a second now. Dan, you're good?
Yeah, but I've got a motion on the floor to postpone.
Actually, there's a motion prior to that. That motion takes precedence.
Right, it does.
Takes precedence.
Okay, so Mike,
I'm just wondering what's gonna be accomplished in the next 2 weeks if we postpone it.
You're asking me?
Yeah, what are we looking, I mean, we're gonna postpone it to the 21st, what are we looking to accomplish in those next 2 weeks?
Well,
What kind of information are we looking to find out, what are we looking to do?
Yeah, I guess one of the things that I would be interested in is the board being in just what is the interest in the building, where is it coming from, what organizations, are serious about acquisition, and what does that acquisition mean, lease, sell, lease option to buy. We've heard a lot of things, but we really haven't, heard the specifics in terms of, the organizations that are, ready to ante up and be serious contenders.
But those are the people that have approached us. So what, I mean, if we continue to hold off on this, I mean,
2 weeks.
knowing who's approached us doesn't mean that, again, that's the universe in terms of people that are interested.
I think 2 weeks would do a world of good in terms of, getting that information, to our awareness and possibly allowing us to communicate to the public in terms of what, their interests may be too. And I agree, we hold the cards in terms of accepting bids, but still I think, that building has been a pretty viable part of the community for over 100 years. And, I would like to see us, recognize that.
But what would we do different if we find out who has had an interest in it?
Well, it would give us a little bit of a heads up in terms of what our next steps or options may be, I believe.
Or if we have any other options that may be more beneficial than selling that particular property.
Like what?
Well,
just
like,
leasing?
recurring income or revenue from a lease agreement as opposed to selling it and all of that money that is received through the sale going toward the debt that we've incurred on that building, which will benefit us in no financial way
But
whatsoever.
then if we're gonna play landlord, then we're gonna have expenses associated with this. We're gonna be taxing the manpower that's associated with our buildings and grounds. We're gonna still have costs associated with it. There's still gonna be insurance associated with it. Do you expect to be able to get a lease to cover all of that? And then we're gonna be responsible.
I guess what I'm asking is those those very questions, and
They're just
who are
looking
the
building and
entities that are
grounds.
looking, and what are their,
We haven't, to my knowledge, and Paul, you can, as chairman of the committee, you can, comment on this. I haven't heard any specifics in terms of, projected lease, cost.
We haven't had anybody come to us to make an offer for anything.
That won't happen until after the board, if you remember back when we went to Buildings and Grounds, we had the conversation, the board needed to determine which way we were going.
Right.
So we won't get anything official until after the board determines which way it's going, and then people will come forward. In terms of who's toured it, we have been talking about that, and we have brought that forward in with regard to organizations. I don't think any of them are secret, but, you know, we have shared that. So we need direction from the board in order, no one is gonna come forward and give us money until we know what we're doing.
How many
And that's what they're waiting
educational institutions have toured IJN?
At this point, we've got that list, I don't think.
Paul, your thoughts, and then I'd like to offer a few.
I don't see where postponing would, I guess I'm back to Mike on this one, would significantly accomplish anything. And I think by, you know, voting on the 2 schools for sale, we're not surrendering any options whatsoever of sale, lease, but we're simply indicating as a board that, you know, we're looking to dispose of 2 properties.
One point I would want to make is that while we may have a list of 1 or 101 who thus far have expressed an interest, it seems to me there's a whole rest of the world out there that may or may not have chosen to express an interest for good reasons. I'm concerned about the free market and altering it in some size, shape, or form. I think, you know, the marketplace will determine a fair and reasonable price if it were sold. And again, I don't see the board committing to the sale. Perhaps if we wanted to inquire about not just what would someone pay, but what might their use of it be, that may be an appropriate step for us to take and consider. But there are also other safeguards in place that would determine what kind of enterprise could or could not go into either of those 2 facilities, given the roles of zoning, given the roles of planning boards, given the roles of zoning boards of appeal. And so to speculate one way or the other is just that. And I don't see the harm in taking the steps and trying to have some degree of closure at this particular point, since it is not committing the board to dispose of it one way or the other. It's clear that these schools are closed. It's clear that, on the other hand, we will probably not need them as schools into the future. And so I think we can exercise some degree of influence over what it might be. But keep in mind, we sell it to person or entity A. They may in turn flip it and sell it to entity B. And at some point, we have to accept the fact that it becomes someone or some other entity's responsibility to use the building as they may see fit for whatever their particular enterprise or purpose might be. And I agree with Michael, without knowing exactly the kinds of data or information that's necessary in 2 weeks, there really doesn't seem to be any value added in delay, in my opinion. So additional comments, and we'll go around again. Yeah.
I feel like a delay and gaining some input from the communities that are gonna be profoundly affected by this decision would go a long way to gaining the trust of the community. our constituents and show that we are actually truly looking out for their best interests. One other question I had unrelated, but still related, was the fact that Boardmanville has been divided. The field is separate from the actual school building. How or would that at all come into play under this resolution?
It's just the building lot, that parcel is what's in this resolution. The
Okay.
field itself is not.
All right, because I know that some of that discussion took place with some of the interest in that building as far as options.
John, any further thoughts?
Like to call the question.
Do you have the phone number?
That was weak.
I'm sorry. So we have a motion and a second, and we have a call for the question. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carried. Good conversation.
What Kathy has is a list of everyone to date who has shown an interest, either called or toured, so we can email it out to everybody.
And I would reasonably expect now that we're actually filling, there might even be additional interest in that. Item G, to approve the agreement or contract with the hospital for physical and occupational therapy. Thank you, Paul. A second? Thank you, Mike. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carried. Item H, upon the recommendation of the superintendent to approve the services contract between the district and Pam Duttweiler.
So,
Thank you, John.
Second.
Thank you, Paul. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
aye.
Opposed? Abstention? Motion carried. I, upon the recommendation of the superintendent to approve the list of budget transfers exceeding $50,000. Thank you, Paul. Second, Michael. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? Motion carried. Personnel, to accept the resignation with regret of Jeannie Steen. Thank you, Amy. A second?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Dan. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? Motion carried. Number 2, to accept the resignation with regret of Amy Anastasia.
Second.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, John. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? Motion carried. 3, upon the recommendation of the superintendent. Thank you, Paul.
I'll second.
Thank you, Amy. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention?
Mr. President, may I make a
Yeah.
comment?
Motion carried, but yes.
The letters that these two individuals wrote were very moving in terms of the gratitude for the opportunity to support a deadline in one state school district. And I think we should take heart from that.
All three of them are incredible people,
Jean
incredible
worked with me
employees.
for many years,
Greatly missed.
and she kept leaving me, but that's okay.
With regard to appointments, to approve the appointment of Amy Bear Weiss, who I understand is here this evening as keyboard specialist. Thank you, Paul.
I'll second.
Thank you, Amy. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? Motion carried.
Miss Amy? What I understand, bleeds red and gold, so it's a nice addition to our group. So welcome.
Well, I bleed red, but you gotta teach me how to bleed gold.
If you bleed gold, maybe you can
See
solve
that?
a budget problem.
There we go.
There we go. Number 2, to authorize payment to Jackie Falk for the purpose of preparing educational materials needed for
I'll
next
move that,
school
Mr.
year.
President.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Paul. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? Motion carried. Thank you. With committee reports, Dan, would you please
Sure.
share audit with us?
The audit committee met on July 16th for an hour. We began our meeting at noon and concluded at 1 o'clock. And the majority of the meeting involved a presentation by Jeff Weiss of Harris Beach, I believe LLC, in terms of our special education audit. Jeff did a pretty thorough job of informing the committee members on his feelings that in all areas of special education, the district pretty much exceeds expectations. He did indicate that there were a couple areas that we may want to consider, taking a look at in terms of areas that are common throughout the state. The use of technology and resource contracted teacher services, I believe, were the 2 areas that he mentioned. May be areas that we would want to review or take a look at in the future. But generally, the audit was very favorable. He did indicate that in several areas, the district exceeded expectations, which, the audit committee members, were very pleased about, so. And that pretty much was the bulk of our committee meeting. I know Lori has asked the audit committee members to think about goals, and I believe at our August meeting, we're gonna be talking about goals for the upcoming year.
Okay, thank you. Questions or comments for Dan? Anything you want to add?
Jeffrey Weiss audited the special ed department. Just wanted to clarify that.
What did I say?
Oh, that's what I thought you said. Okay.
Finance, Chairperson Michael?
Yeah, with, Kathy provided us with, some information on the cafeteria bid update, and obviously we voted on that today. She also presented the 11-12 expenditures and revenues, as well as the projected fund balances. Year end is June 30th, so Kathy and company will be, doing some analysis, doing some adjustments, and once, those are complete, then, we'll get a better picture of where we ended up the year, as well as where we're at with the fund balance. I don't have my notes with me, but, we did go over 13-14 budget assumptions. Kathy provided us with some of the assumptions that have been used in terms of beginning to develop a 13-14 budget. And we discussed, some of the parameters associated with an ad hoc budget advisory committee. And again, I don't have those, but Kathy, we talked about making a few changes in that. And that's being, revised, and, we should have already final copy of the particulars associated with that soon. And lastly, Kathy advised us that, with the best crystal ball that hopefully she doesn't have, that we possibly could see a federal aid cut, in January or February.
And that is looking more and more like it won't happen, but we're still gearing up and preparing in case it does.
It's good. That's it.
Thank you. Any questions or comments for Michael?
Was that cut related to the sequester provision?
Yes.
Okay, onward. Informational items. We will need to, I believe that, delegate an alternate to the Allegheny Cattaraugus County's School Board Association, so think about that, and we'll do that next time. As you know, they have breakfast or dinner meetings, and bring in people that provide training and information relevant to the operation of school boards. State School Board Association would want us to have a delegate in their resolutions or what's the word I'm looking for?
The legislative.
Legislative meetings to vote on different proposed resolutions that organizations present. That would take place at the fall conference, October in Rochester. So if you think you are attending and have an interest in spending as long as is necessary in a room to review and vote on different proposals, please consider that.
Where's the fall conference this year?
Rochester.
It
Rochester.
is in Rochester, just a couple hours away.
And we did receive information with regard to BoCE's budget adjustments, some back and forth there. Are there questions about any of those informational items? So let's come prepared next time to figure out who would be our delegates and alternates.
Whoever doesn't show up for the next board meeting.
There you go.
That's how you got vice chair, something like that.
We have care of policies, number 3262 with regard to advertising, and this would be our second reading. Are there questions, comments, further revisions that may be in order? Below you would see a motion then to approve that. Thank you, Paul. And a second?
Second.
Thank you, Michael. Just to clarify, we're voting on 3262 only, even though I just realized that motion bundles the two policies. So forgive me for that mistake, but with regard to 3262, there's been a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carried. With regard to policy 5800 and sponsorships, thank you, Paul.
Second.
Thank you, John. Any other additional discussion? We've reviewed this previously. Okay, then all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? Motion carried. We will need a special meeting prior to the start of the school year. It's usually late August that we need last minute hirings generally. So we will ask you to indicate your availability for one or two possible dates. Is the sense around this table evening might be better, like August 30th, August 31st? Evenings better?
Yeah, I mean, for me, unless you do it on a Thursday, then typically I'll get it done during the day.
Okay, so we'll see where we fall, and hopefully we can get majority of us to agree on one of two or three possible dates late August. And we'll schedule that special meeting and announce it at our next meeting. Executive session, I believe we have the need to discuss negotiations in executive session. Is there
And potential litigation.
and potential litigation? How exciting. Anything else? I would have a motion then.
Move we go into executive session for those two purposes.
Second.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Mike. All in favor?
Aye.